first of all, an important lesson to learn is your mission statement, while you do want to commit to something and be able to live by it and to be able to use it as a way to identify yourself, you have to realize it's not a locked it's not a locked entity, and that it should be open to be able to be revisited. Our target population is undocumented young people from the ages of 14 through 35, and parents and family members of undocumented young people, and educators and allies of undocumented young people. It seems very straightforward to put that, and we often have to keep returning to that. Who is our target population? When we go out to parent groups, actually, are we reaching out to these parent groups because we're trying to help them, or because directly, or we're trying to help them because they're the parents of undocumented young people, and our ultimate mission is to help those students. And so that's also something that I think it's easy to read it once it's been created, but actually when you are in the process of creating it or looking at it, that one has to be sensitive to all the nuances of how you define a population. We pride ourselves on the ability to provide holistic support to undocumented young people. And we do that through direct support, through leadership development, through community education and outreach, through creative expression, and also through advocacy work. And we've always had this holistic approach. I think it came pretty naturally to us because we worked with a relatively small group of students and we got to know them very well. And it was very hard to just say, well, I only want to talk to you about your academic needs. I actually don't want to discuss why it's hard for your family to get food right now. Or I really need you to be on time to this meeting with a counselor, and I don't care if you didn't get here today because your father lost his job or because you're really scared about him having to drive to that area of town. It was just impossible to try to segment our students and their needs and the factors that were influencing them in a way that felt authentic and caring to us. So again, from the very beginning, we tried to understand them as complex individuals who we needed to get to know all of and be open to hearing everything about their lives. Our core programs are our New American Scholars Program. That's our scholarship program. Those of your educators might be familiar with from having recommended students to apply to it. Since 2007, we've awarded about 125 academic scholarships, totaling almost $500,000. And these are primarily for high-achieving, financially needy immigrant, undocumented students. We have reached students in about 23 colleges, or exactly 23 colleges in the Bay Area and beyond. We have a legal services department. A lot of you might have heard presentations by our legal services team today. The heart of that program is a Dreamer intake service that we have. It's an online intake service that provides customized, personalized analysis of immigration remedies, and we've served about 1,400 young people nationwide through that service. All of the preliminary analysis and review is done by Dreamers themselves, so young people who want to go into the legal field, and then we have an immigration attorney on staff who reviews all those cases. We also have a community outreach and education program. This actually conference falls under that. And so we do mostly face-to-face work and getting out to actually reach students and parents and educators where they're at themselves. This is the only event we do where we actually try to bring people all together in one place. And we reach about 300, we do about 300 presentations a year and reach about 26,000 people. Like our legal services team, that's run by undocumented young people. So the people who are actually going out and doing those presentations are undocumented young people sharing their stories as well as providing information and hope to the people they're talking to. We also do student support and career services. A lot of that falls within the people that are already in our existing programs. So the people that are in our scholarship programs or the people that work on our legal services team or do our outreach, we make a commitment to supporting them and helping them succeed through mentoring as well as support in pursuing their careers. We also house a program called Pre-Health Dreamers. Some of you did any of you go to the pre-health career track? So we are I guess incubating would be the right word, different groups who are looking at specific career paths paths. And that was a very natural one for us because the Pre-Health Dreamers was started by 3 of our former scholarship recipients who met through our organization and wanted to band together to figure out how to move forward in their own careers, and we encouraged them to kind of expand outward to not just supporting themselves, but to be able to support many students like them throughout the country. Through that supports and career service, we also have a DACA mini grants program. So we provide Kickstarter grants to students who have recently been awarded DACA but still need financial support to be able to go out and pursue whatever career goals they have. And we provide support services to those DACA mini grant recipients as well as just financial support. We pride ourselves definitely on our resources, and those of you who have picked up your conference packet know we have a lot of resources. We've just given you a very small glimpse into those. We have a scholarship list. That scholarship list amazingly started just with educators like Jane Slater. I don't think Tony was involved in that one, but we just started that list because we had a number of educators who worked with us who were carrying around their own tattered sheets of scholarships and were helping undocumented students and just saying, here, try to apply to this one. I know this one accepts undocumented students. And we convinced those people with all their tattered sheets to actually give us that information and convince them that together, even though you don't want to tell anyone about those because those are the ones you hope your students will get, if we actually combine all of our lists, we'll open up the pot for everyone and we'll actually learn about far more than you would have ever known on your little sheets. So our scholarship list started just as a Bay Area list and now is a national scholarship list. And it's about, I think, 60 pages long. It's now divided into California Bay Area and national. And it's really exciting how that list continues to grow as more and more people, as we learn about more and more, and as well as more and more scholarships open up to students who don't have citizenship or permanent residency. We actually are just about ready to release a graduate school scholarship list, which is about the same length already. It's about 60 pages, and that will include scholarships, fellowships, as well as internships that are available, career or academic internships that are available to students in graduate schools. And a big section of it is divided by actually career path or area of study. So that's exciting. All of our materials are actually written by undocumented young people. We feel like they are the best people to drive those materials because they are the people that have been wanting those materials and using whatever they could find for many years and have the insider information as well as can reach out at 11 o'clock at Facebook, ask people for more information. So it's a very easy way for them to gather the information. Then we help them by providing them a lot of support, professional support in editing, information checking, basic things like copy editing. I'm a copy editing fiend and everyone gets very frustrated with me about it. But, and then we have Educator, our student guides financial aid guide. You saw our California Dream Act guide. We just put a new version out and we'll be finalizing that in the coming weeks. We also have educator guides about financial aid as well as about DACA, how to apply to DACA. Parent guides, we have one in English and Spanish. And then advocacy materials, we have a fact sheet as well as a case for undocumented students that we believe is really helpful for people who are still needing to advocate within their institutions for support from undocumented students or foundations who are trying to make the case to their trustees that this is an area that they feel is deserving of support. And then student stories and poems. Julio started a website called Things I'll Never Say, which is a repository of amazing creative work by undocumented students, mostly creative writing, but there's also video and graphic art and photography as well as on there, and that's clearinghouse for undocumented students nationwide. So those are our resources. As I've said many times, we are proud of the work that is led by undocumented young people. Our programming today really is led designed and led by undocumented young people and with support from committed allies. So we have a programming staff of 7, and with the exception of our attorney, the rest of them are all currently undocumented or have DACA or were undocumented. And that has really been a tremendous source of pride and identity for our organization. And there's our lovely staff in case you can guess which one is not undocumented. Maybe no. Okay. So I thought I was going to have Carrie here to talk about the beginning of our organization. Unfortunately, she's not here, so I'll have a kind of one-sided view of this. So E4FC started in 2006. And it started at a birthday party. My co-founder and I were at a birthday party of a friend, and someone made the mistake, I guess, well, not a mistake, but told us that we both were interested in undocumented students. And Carrie and I glommed onto each other at this social birthday party and started talking about undocumented students. And really, 7, 8 years later, that's still what we talk about all the time. She was a counselor at Eastside College Prep in East Palo Alto, and had the amazing experience of having only a class at that time of about 30 people, and about a quarter of them were undocumented. And it's a small private school. The mission of that school was to get 100% of their students to four-year universities, and they gave her a lot of support and time to figure out how to make it work for that, less than 10 students. And so she just had so many strategies and so much information. And I was in a totally different situation. I was actually working as a consultant for a number of different nonprofits and kind of hearing about this in a very hit or miss way. I wasn't a college counselor. I was just meeting undocumented young people who I thought should be college material, and I felt like should be going on to college. And I just didn't know what was happening with them, honestly. And I tried to remember when I really knew nothing. I didn't even know the vocabulary. I didn't know the right questions to ask. I think students were trying to tell me things, and I was completely oblivious to what they were saying. And I try to remember back to that because it wasn't actually that long ago, and I consider myself an educated, intelligent person, and I was really ignorant. So we banded together, and I was telling her these stories and sharing a lot of failure with her. I was saying, look, I know this student, and she dropped out at this point. I feel like it's too late for her. She's not willing to kind of re-enter this discussion. And Carrie was telling me what she was learning. And there was success for her in just seeing kids get off to college, although we had no idea what was going to happen once they actually just got into college. And so we started meeting, talking, and trying to figure out how we were going to help students. And we had no idea, honestly. We had no idea what to do. We just knew there was a tremendous amount of need. We didn't know what kind of programming was most appropriate. We didn't really even know where to start. The only thing that felt true to us is that we were not the right people to tell this story. That undocumented young people were the right people to tell their stories and to figure out what needed to be done. Because we saw that the students we were working with had so much initiative and were so perseverant that we figured we just needed to give them a space to be able to come up with some of their own solutions, and we needed to be able to give them access to people who had power and resources. And so I think from the very beginning, felt like we were the brokers, sort of like the people that could just get them in front of people who needed to hear about them, but never the ones that, again, were going to represent them or speak for them. So the first thing we did was actually create a video, and it was a total boring talking heads video, but people cried, and it was just all these stories that we felt were so moving and segmented into very specific subject matters. We showed that a lot, and then we actually created another movie that followed kids for a 2-year period and had actually more of a storyline. And it was a very useful tool when undocumented students were very afraid of coming out. At that time, it was very scary for someone to stand up in a room and label themselves undocumented, and so this sort of movie was an easy way to kind of get those stories across. But the next things about what to do from there got actually pretty difficult, figuring out, okay, how do we balance the need for direct support versus outreach and education? Everyone from the beginning wanted us to do outreach and education. I think we were coming into contact most with other educators who were really wanted to get people in front of their students to convince them that it was possible, to show them the way. And that felt really intimidating to Carrie and I because it was so hard with our limited capacity. We were just 2 people, we were volunteers. We had no idea how we were going to address those needs, and we saw getting in front of one presentation would just generate 20 more presentations. And we also were scared about pushing more students down this path without really not changing what was available to those students. We just felt like the most perseverant students we knew were not really knowing how they were going to get through college. There was so little money at that time for students, and we were afraid of just kind of going out and doing these presentations and really naively just saying, go do this, and being aware that that pipeline was not going to get any larger. And so what we started doing, and again, not everyone was, very few people were actually supportive of this, was we said, we're going to start with scholarships. We're going to actually, we do not know that much about policy and advocacy work. We don't know how to push forward the DREAM Act. And we're going to we do know a little bit about scholarships, because Carrie had been working with a lot of scholarship providers, and I had connections at the Silicon Valley Community Foundations and different scholarship providers. And we thought, if we can just get undocumented students in front of scholarship providers and convince them to open up their applicant pools, that at least will open the pot up a little bit. And that, again, did not turn out to be that easy. People were like, it's not legal, I don't think we can touch this, our trustees are not interested in this, we don't even think there's any students, we don't think anyone will come forward. We actually got people to tell us that they didn't even think that we should be doing this, that this was not something that they would want to touch legally. And we kind of just said, well, we're going to do this anyway. And we said, we realized that we couldn't just tell other people to do that, but we actually had to create a scholarship fund on our own. We never thought that our scholarship fund would actually be able to address the tremendous financial needs of undocumented students, but we thought it could serve as a model for other scholarships, so that other scholarships could not say, oh, no one does that, or it's not possible. We'd actually be able to show that, yes, it is possible, we're not getting arrested for this, and actually look at the amazing students that we're able to help through this. Look at the stories that we're able to tell you about the students we're being able to affect. So that was the beginning. It was a scholarship fund, and then from that we started having these extraordinary students who were benefiting from us, but were finding a student community within E4FC and a place where they could feel valued and they could contribute. And so much of our programming that you see today has come out of this group of scholarship students in the beginning who were starting to say, like, what else can I do here? And this was also a time when they couldn't work. This was like they were getting out of school, they were graduating from college, and they had nothing to do. So like Jose Ariola, who you see today, and probably every one of you has come in contact, he was lying on his couch for like 3 months post-graduation, deeply depressed, because there was nothing for him to do. And he was horribly embarrassed for everyone he used to talk to, because they were like, you're so talented, what are you doing? And he had no answer for that. And so it was students like that who we were able to create a space to encourage them to contribute. So I'm going to end that, say that is the beginning phase. And I wanted to just share a few lessons that I learned from that beginning stage. And this is for founders. And my first is find your bliss. And you're nodding your head, and maybe this is very relevant to you as you're starting your nonprofit. I think that it's very important when you're starting your own organization to really find out what makes you happy and what you want to be doing. And I think Cesar Cruz talked about this today as well. So it's true, whatever kind of work you're doing. But I think particularly when you're starting a nonprofit, you're probably not being paid to do that work. No one is actually like calling you in the morning telling you need to be doing that work. It needs to be very self-motivated, self-driving. You need to be doing something that you love. It's not only something that you feel like is valuable for the world and addresses a need, but something that moves you and keeps you energized. And I learned that actually, I have to say, Carrie, if it wasn't for Carrie, we wouldn't have done scholarships. She really loved scholarships. She loved the immediate gratification of working with students, and I followed that, and I said, let's do that, because that seems so true to you. And I will always appreciate her knowledge of what made her happy. She said, yes, it's not a long-term solution, it's not systemic, but I won't do this if I don't feel the immediate gratification of working with young people. The next is forget your boundaries. So if you're a founder of an organization, you're not going to have that many boundaries. I have long ago forgotten to give up I've learned to give up my personal and professional boundaries. And I joked this morning about being at our kitchen table. Everything was at my kitchen table. For like every party for E4FC, every meeting for E4FC was at my apartment for a while. And there were, when the second year after we started E4FC, I got married and convinced my husband that we should ask for donations for E4FC instead of wedding presents. But I think it's, so I'm still not sure if he was, anyway, he went along with that. So I think that it's enabled me to keep going, to know that my friends and family from the very beginning supported that work. Initially, a lot of friends and family really just supported E4FC because of me or because of Carrie. But what has been so gratifying to me is to see the people who started because it was me and then learned about the issue and have become incredibly passionate about it on their own. And then now it has nothing to do with me. But I've loved to see my friends and family support it and to grow a community that is now both people I'm meeting through the issue as well as people I'm bringing to the issue because of my connections to them. The last thing I'm going to say is be obsessed. I talked to a fundraiser at some point and I was explaining to her, I don't know how to ask for money for this cause. There's so many good causes in the world. How can I convince someone to give to this cause versus that cause? How can I dare say that undocumented students are more needy than hungry people here? And she was like, you should not be in this if you're not obsessed with this and you're not singularly focused and believe that everyone should fund your cause. And we can have criticisms about that as a worldview, but I do believe that's true. If you are a founder and you're responsible for fundraising, you have to deeply believe that your cause is worth supporting and to be able to argue for it, both in terms of people's time and resources and passion. And I think often you can't convince someone, but actually to be able to show why you justify your time and energy and resources in that direction, that's very important. So that's those are my lessons for founders. I want to go on to community building and actually bring up Jane Slater. So in this section, I'm going to be talking about the need to grow a community around you. And this was specifically important for me because after a few years, my daughter got to sit. Carrie decided actually to not move on with me at E4FC. We had a period where it was very uncomfortable actually. I wanted to keep going on in E4FC and she actually wanted to go on to something else. And it was a difficult period. And finally we said, yes, that's fine, it's fine, you can go on. But I was so lonely and in knowing how to move forward this. And I really needed people around me to support me. And Jane came in at a time during the formation of our Educator Action Group, when I suddenly had a group of people around who could support me, who could hear what I was doing. And they weren't actually undocumented young people because I felt like I couldn't share with them a lot of the concerns I was having, a lot of the worries I was having about raising money and things. I just couldn't burden them with that. And then initially, actually, I think I've learned how to do that better. But Jane came in at a very important time. And so I wanted to let Jane share a little bit about how she found out about E4FC and why she came to us.
Okay. Hi. I teach at Sequoia High School in Redwood City and have been teaching there for a long time, and had been sort of around that same time, 2007, 2008, sort of in a niche of teaching 9th and 10th graders. And then I had 3 or 4 students who I had as 9th graders and as 10th graders who were then 12th graders and starting to apply to college. And I really just hadn't paid much attention to the college application process. And here they were, undocumented. I also hadn't paid much attention to that as an issue, although I knew that they were undocumented. And all of a sudden, there they were getting accepted to schools and we were trying to talk about visiting schools in the Bay Area and how were they going to pay for it. And I remember calling a couple of financial aid offices and saying, well, what can you do for undocumented students? And really having people say, what are you talking about? Or what is that? Or I'm not sure. And realizing that these girls who also had sort of missed the scholarship boat at that time weren't going to be going to the 4-year colleges that they had gotten accepted to. And we sort of were sitting and having lunch together every day and saying, well, we need to do something and we should start a club and we should start fundraising. And we did immediately start fundraising, and we were fundraising in our school and basically asking my coworkers to give us money, and we were coming up with very small amounts of money. But by the end of that school year, we ended up with something like $300, and people were starting to say to me, well, is this tax deductible? I don't know. So I asked the school treasurer, and they didn't know what to do with it either. And I said, well, I want to get this money together, and when we get enough, we want to give a scholarship. And actually, the school treasurer suggested I speak to this larger organization called Philanthropic Ventures, which is, what is it officially?
It's a foundation, yeah.
It's a foundation where they knew that some money had been housed for other organizations. And when I contacted Philanthropic Ventures, they suggested that I contact Kathy and Carrie, saying they're working on something similar to what you're talking about. So maybe a few weeks later, I met Kathy and Carrie and told them I have these $400 or something, or maybe a little bit more by then. Can you help me out? And they did, and they umbrellaed our meager sum for a little while until we were able to figure out a way to deal with it on our own. But that lasted for probably 2 years, where I sort of left that meeting thinking, well, they're nice and good. Now I have a place to put this money. And that was sort of the beginning. And then it was probably a few months later that or into the next school year, and by then I was a little bit more proactive and had students looking for scholarships, and had a student actually become one of the scholars. Well, probably before that, Kathy said, well, I have this group of educators who meets at my house. Do you want to come see them? Or do you want to come hang out with us, basically?
Well, and sort of, and the hanging out is kind of what we did do. So I sort of joked about the wine this morning, but it was true. We drank a fair amount of, Tony does not drink wine, so but what was really important, I think, in this initial group of educators was that we really needed to be supports for each other. So everyone in that group was working full-time and would commit to coming to these monthly meetings at like 6 o'clock. People were driving from San Jose to San Francisco or fighting traffic across the East Bay. People had children they needed to find babysitters for. And we needed to find a balance of doing stuff that was very productive so people feel like they weren't wasting a night, but that we were also like hearing the stories that people were going through with their students, because there was a lot of failure too. People were constantly seeing students who were not going on to school or who they couldn't figure out a solution for, or that weren't getting into schools, or got into schools but couldn't pay for it. And so I think we needed to have a space to be able to hear each other and what we were going, and we all can talk about students needing support for one another, but I think we really recognized that we needed to be supports we needed to get support as allies. One thing that Jane and other educators in that group taught me is don't be afraid to ask. I think I have been someone who's been taught to be very self-reliant. And that group of people told me, ask, so, and, you know, and then I learned that actually it's much better to have a group of volunteers who have very porous boundaries, who are willing to do an incredible amount and will always be there for you, than like a large number of volunteers who you're always going to be fighting to see whether this is something they care about, or only going to show up once in a while. And so I wanted to ask Jane where she puts her boundaries. Jane now houses our educator actions, not in my house, it's in Jane's house now. But Jane has had undocumented students living with her. You funded them out of your own personal funds. To my feeling, you don't have that many boundaries, and I guess I would ask you, in your work between your professional work and then what you do to support a cause outside, where do you draw the line, or are there any lines?
Well, I guess I don't really think about having lines, but at the same time, I think once we get, once you have this community, or once you meet all of these people who are working on the same thing that you're working on, that was very eye-opening to me. I never thought to myself, wow, I'm so isolated here and nobody knows what's going on. But then I realized, after sitting down at the kitchen table a few times, wow, I'm really isolated. I was really isolated there, and I didn't know what to do. So in the same way that I feel, I guess I have boundaries. But in the same way that Kathy's saying, she learned to just ask, I did the same thing, and it's sort of a running joke now in our group that everything goes to Sequoia High School, because I make sure that Tony comes and does writing workshops, and Nancy Jeditis from State comes and does financial aid workshops, and every connection that I've made, I've said, okay, I'm going to use, and I do, and I think people are really happy to help each other, and we all have different strengths and are in different situations, and it takes some of the load off in the end, you know, people to share your sort of successes and failures with, and move on and generate new ideas with. So,
Jay, my last question to you is, what do you think your greatest contribution to E4FC is, or what are you most proud of? And how have you been able to be affiliated with our organization? Well, I don't know about my greatest contribution, but it's been a super rewarding experience for me, and I feel that I have put energy and thought and time into trying to do the most that I can for E4FC. I think it's a great organization. It's also has really helped me. It has given me these opportunities to work with people I would never have met. I was, when we did the first conference at San Francisco State a couple years ago, I think we felt really proud of having sat down and accomplished that. The action guides, the educator guides, and the scholarship lists, and really having something to share with people, like something that could be taken beyond my school or the 3 schools that we were representing, or whatever we were doing, was pretty rewarding. We were just really never able to come up with a T-shirt. Thank you. Oh, do you have a question?
Yeah. Sequoia High School does sponsor a dream conference that's actually created by students, and I went last year. We took a group of 50 kids from Watsonville, and it was great. I couldn't believe that these were students that were leading, that generated this whole conference, that planned it and carried it out. It was beautiful.
Thanks for bringing that up just before I go sit down. We are having a student conference on February 8th, and we did have some, thank goodness you brought all the students too. It made for a crowd. And we did have a lot of adults co-leading the sessions last year, and we're trying to have it be all student-run this year, so for good or for bad. But it is at Sequoia High School on February 8th, and it's you could go to Sequoia High School's Facebook page, their Sequoia Dream Club Facebook page, to find out how to register. And if people register, we can order enough food and T-shirts for people.
But just to focus, that conference is designed for students.
Yes.
Today we're all here as educators and allies, but that one is actually designed for allies to bring or direct current high school students to go to be learned from other high school students.
And for them to network with each other. Great. Yeah, it really is.
Okay. I'm actually going to hold on questions for a second because I have 2 more people I want to bring. Thank you, Jay. And I just asked her to speak like an hour ago when Carrie said she was sick. Thank you. Can I bring up Jay?
Bachelor number 2.
Yes, bachelor. So Jay Sherwin is a former vice president of programming for the College Access Foundation, and so we had, as I said, we started with the scholarship program. It's 100% of our money was going into scholarships. This was years before anyone ever got paid at our organization, and everyone said, "Hey, you should apply to the College Access Foundation." So one of the first grants that we ever submitted was to the College Access Foundation. Or the first even grant proposals we even initiated and talked about was the College Access Foundation. And it was a very disappointing moment when Jay informed us that we really couldn't move forward with the proposal because the Board of Trustees really was not ready to take up this issue of undocumented young people. And this was at a time, it was really hard for us to see because we knew a lot of our peer organizations that had undocumented students were being funded by the College Access Foundation. And so we felt like there was some amount of injustice in all this. What do you mean you can't fund us just because we're saying we're doing what we're doing? You won't fund us, but other people who are doing the exact same thing but won't talk about it are getting funded. And so it was, for a long time, I felt like such a failure that we never really got farther than that. But I also really appreciated Jay, that he was so honest with us throughout that whole process, was really trying to tell me what was going on behind the scenes and educate me about how the foundation was making decisions and what was going on so that I could understand when I was approaching other foundations, just for my own satisfaction, that my proposal wasn't just sitting in the garbage somewhere not read. that I knew was happening. But I want Jay to provide his own perspective, because as he's told me what was going on behind the scenes, I've actually had a better understanding of what was happening there.
So thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Good afternoon, everyone. Kathy and I have talked about this a few times, and it's actually a great story of how we have very different perceptions of the same events. Because what Kathy just said to you is quite true. I understand that she and Carrie were disappointed that College Access Foundation wasn't ready to say yes to their proposal. At the same time, I consider it one of my proudest achievements at College Access Foundation that the conversation that Carrie and Kathy helped me launch moved the foundation in a really positive direction that I'm not sure it would have gone so soon or so clearly had it not been for their overture to us. I had just started myself. I was the vice president for programs at College Access Foundation. We had really just been started. It was what's called a conversion foundation, an old student loan company that became a foundation. And as you heard, the strategy was, it's changed a little since then, but the strategy was to give grants to nonprofit organizations who know and serve students well at the community level and let them make decisions about which students should get the scholarship money. It also recognizes that scholarships alone aren't enough, that these organizations could provide a variety of other supports and services along with the scholarships. So I came early to sort of design and build this thing from the ground up, to hire a program staff. And I remember meeting Kathy and Carrie very early on. I came from Boston. I didn't know that much about the undocumented student issue. And it was huge for me to learn my way into it, and immediately admired what Kathy and Carrie were about and what E4FC was about. But I also understood the politics of the foundation I was working for. We had a very conservative board. One of the members was former Governor Pete Wilson's wife. Another member, others were conservative business leaders from San Diego, Southern California, had a very different set of attitudes about undocumented issues than we did on staff, or we did maybe more generally in the Bay Area. And my executive director at the time, Caroline Boitano, I gave her great credit to figure out how we could move the foundation and what was realistic. What we had been doing was not asking. We were giving grants to community-based organizations, some of which we assumed maybe were going to undocumented students, but we didn't know, and in some cases our grantees didn't know. Sometimes they made it a point not to know. E4FC forced the issue onto the table. We surveyed all of our grantees. We found out that at least 10% of our scholarships were going to undocumented students. So it was several hundred students a year or more, which I consider to be actually a great accomplishment. But then the question was, would the board be willing to formalize that rather than just ignoring it? Formalize a policy that says, we take no position. We give this grant to our grantees. We trust their judgment and discretion. We let them decide. We concluded on staff the board was ready to do that, and in fact we had a really positive and powerful board discussion, and the board was willing to go there to say, we take no position. We continue to give the grants to community-based organizations. They were not ready to go to a place that said, we will give a grant to an organization called Educators for Fair Consideration, that was explicitly and visibly and aggressively in their mind about serving undocumented students. So I still considered it to be an accomplishment, learning for sure that we were funding a lot of undocumented students and leaving the door open to funding more. And for me personally, it really helped me understand the issue better and began my own personal journey of deeper commitment to these students and these issues, to the point where now we've come full circle. I left the foundation a few years ago. I'm now a consultant to foundations and nonprofits. I volunteered this year to be a mentor and advisor to the legal advocates at E4FC. because I'm a recovering lawyer myself and thought maybe I would have some useful advice about why they should or shouldn't go to law school. And that relationship led to a conversation with Kathy about working with E4FC to help design and launch a national matching scholarship program to encourage scholarship providers around the country to either begin to support undocumented students or increase their support. And I'm now engaged in that with E4FC. So I'm proud of how far the foundation got. I think the message is to all of us, even if it doesn't immediately mean a grant, even if it isn't the slam dunk victory you hoped for, that engaging funders in that kind of conversation is always really positive, and that may lead in all sorts of ways to outcomes you might not have initially predicted. And so it was good for the foundation. I think it's been good for Educators for Fair Consideration, and certainly it's been very good for me personally because it gave me an entree and exposure to things that I have only grown in my commitment to.
We're done.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Thanks, Jake. So I think for me, the key lessons from this community building, I'm sorry this is so quick, but one is that to get personal. I think the relationships that I was able to form with Jane and other members of the Educator Action team were effective because we were able to really be there as supports for each other, to hear the stories of the work that we were doing with students, and to really dig deep into those relationships and know that those were going to be meaningful far beyond just the number of people in the room. And then the other is don't be afraid to ask. So I'm not afraid to ask Jane to host meeting after meeting at her house. And I think she's not afraid to keep asking for resources for her own students. And I think that's a great lesson when so many of the students we work with are always told no. And are always told to back down and not to be demanding because they don't deserve to have ground to be demanding. I think to have people that they're working with who are demanding and definitely believe that the work they do is extremely important. And the other thing is fundraising as advocacy. So I think in this case, we didn't really have an advocacy team at that point or an advocacy program, but what I was actually doing and applying to the College Access Foundation was advocacy work. It was a failed fundraising attempt at first, but it was actually a very successful advocacy effort. And I would say that that's the same thing for you who are encouraging your students to apply for scholarships. Even if they don't get that scholarship, what they're often doing is advocating to those scholarship organizations about why even undocumented students should be at the table. My last section is on leadership development. So I'm going to call up Julio to join me now. So Julio, I wanted to ask you, how you found your way to E4FC and what you got out of it.
So I was teaching high school Spanish at Downtown College Prep, a small charter school in San Jose. Betty was one of my students, and the school found out about my status, so they asked me to resign. And in the moment, I felt like my world was ending, like everything I had worked so hard for was just gone from one day to the other, and I was so lost. I had hit yet another obstacle, and I had no idea where to turn or where to go next. So in a lunch conversation with a friend that I had gone to school with, she told me about this national internship program for undocumented students called Dream Summer, and this was spring of 2011. That was the first year that Dream Summer started. So I looked up this organization, I applied for the internship, and I was lucky enough that I got the internship. And that year, E4FC was collaborating with the UCLA Labor Center, who's organizing this internship program. So I met Kathy, I met the E4FC community, I learned about all the programs. And through E4FC, I feel like I was able to find this community that I so much needed. Because up until then, I had been living very much in the closet, both about being undocumented, but also about my sexual identity, about being gay. And in retrospect, losing my teaching position was the best thing that could have happened. Oh my God. Like, at E4FC, I feel like I grew so much. I made so many connections. I became empowered. I mean, next thing you know, I'm sitting in downtown LA in the middle of the street, blocking traffic, shutting down an ICE building, a detention center, and chanting, undocumented and unafraid. And it's so empowering. So E4FC has really been so pivotal to me, so life-changing, because it's that net that caught me when I had nowhere else to go. So that's, I mean, there's so much more, but that's a little bit about how that happened.
So Julio was in our creative writing program the first summer. He was part of E4FC when he had his Dream Summer internship. And then as soon as he finished the creative writing program himself, we said maybe you'd like to lead the creative writing program. So I wonder if you can talk about what it's like to be a participant and someone who's learning and growing as part of a program, as well as someone who's trying to lead other people.
Yeah, so it was very interesting because I had to shift my identity. Up until then, my identity was, I'm a high school Spanish teacher, I'm a professional, like in the workforce. And all of a sudden, I'm back to being a student, back to being in college, and it was difficult to shift that perspective, shift that identity. But being part of the creative writing program helped me so much because that part of me that I had been ignoring for so long, I was finally able to go back and access those memories, access those emotions, those experiences, and use creative writing as a tool for processing and for healing. And the connections that I made that summer, I mean, with Monica, the instructor, with the other participants, the other students, are invaluable. These are connections that I know I'm gonna keep for the rest of my life. And then when Kathy asked me for coffee and asked me if I would be interested in joining E4FC as a staff member, I was so touched that she saw something in me, and she wanted to bring me on board. And I think at the beginning we were trying to decide what my role should be. It's not like I was applying for a specific position. It was more about, we want you to join our team. What are you interested in? What can you help out? And I love that because that showed me that it was honoring like the things that I was passionate about. And then being on the other side of leading a team and starting to develop the program was a huge learning experience. I had never before tried to create a national creativity contest or a website or even teach creative writing. So I had to do a lot of learning. And Kathy has been an amazing mentor the whole time.
So I'm sorry to get to the sad part. Well, no, this isn't true. But so Julio decided to leave our organization and go back into teaching. And I wonder if you can talk about that decision to leave and what it was like how your thoughts about that decision, and now about a half a year later, how you're thinking about that now.
It was one of the most difficult decisions that I've ever had to make. Up until that point, the decisions that I was making were based on the opportunities that were available to me. The door opens, I'm running through it. That's how I became a teacher. I started subbing and they needed a full-time Spanish sub, so I did it and I stayed. And for the first time, I had options. And because of E4FC, I found out that I had potential remedy through political asylum. I applied for political asylum. My case is still pending, but last May, I received my work permit. And so for the first time ever, I had to make a decision, and I really didn't. I was so split because E4FC has been such a big support and family to me. But there was a lot of factors that played into my decision, by the clock ticking on my credential about to expire, and wanting to go back into the classroom with all this new knowledge and different perspective as a completely out person, as undocumented, as queer, and to go back on my own terms, right? Because the first time I felt like I was just surviving, and experience it in this way. So 6 months later, I think it was a good decision. I know it was a good decision because I feel so lucky that I can still do things like this. I can still advocate. I can still be part of this movement. But I'm also making a lot of really profound connections with my students, and I'm bringing what I learned at E4FC to my school. I'm leading workshops for my colleagues and for the rest of the organization on how to support undocumented students. Started a creative writing club. I told myself, I'm going back in the classroom, and I know being a teacher is like a marathon. Once it starts, it doesn't stop. There's never like, oh, I'm done with work. What do I do now? That never happens. So I had to remind myself that I'm gonna do this, but I cannot lose sight of the bigger picture. I have to stay involved. I have to make sure that my students can think critically and know about the issues that are happening beyond the space of the school. So I'm being really proactive about doing that.
Thank you.
Thank
Leave it
you.
there. You can stick around while I have my little lessons from leadership development and chime in if you want. So I think extrapolating from what Julio said, my key lessons on leadership development and building young leaders are, one was starting with individual strengths and passion. So as Julio mentioned, when we brought him in as staff, we didn't say, here's a position, would you like to fill it? We said, Julio, we want more of you. You've been a program participant, and now we want you to be part of our leadership team. How do you want to be part of that team? We just know there is this light and this brilliance that we want to benefit from, but we want to work with you to figure out how to make that happen. And I think we've done that with all of our staff. The same is true of Jose Arilla. I really wanted him to do educator advocacy, and he wanted to do community advocacy, working mostly with students when he came in, and that was the origins of our outreach team. But everyone we start with where they want to go from, and believe that their passions and their strengths will be generators for all the goodness that comes for our organization. The next is that we really do, and we didn't talk about this so much, we really do try to feed them with a lot of mentors and external input and high expectations. So, passions and strengths can get you very far, but you also need other people to give you input, and you need to learn how things are done by other people and realize that there are models that come before you and can be used and can be valuable for you. So we definitely force you to go out and talk to a lot of people and work with a lot of other creative writers as instructors. And then another thing that's been really hard for me to learn is how to give room for experimentation. I'm kind of a perfectionist, and how to give room for creativity and also uncertainty and failure, right? Creativity has to come with the potential for failure and uncertainty. And I think when people feel like there is no room for failure, it gets very stressful. And so I've had to learn how to be okay with things going wrong, how to okay with a workshop that was undersubscribed or something, or and realize actually that I think that the young people I work with are much better at that they're actually very used to uncertainty. Like they actually have not had the possibility to live with uncertainty. So uncertainty seems very pretty okay, right? And that also the immigrant young people that I work with are also huge risk takers. And so often I've just needed to get out of the way and just let them move forward with taking their risks and moving forward with really high ambitions. And my instinct has always been to like try to get them to focus more or to like define. And often I think I've just been, thankfully they just locked me out of the room. So, and then the last thing is seeing the whole person. I think that it has been a hard journey with, or a really amazing journey to actually, Julio and I used to check in about once a week, and we would have hour-long check-ins, and probably about 20 to 30 minutes were about how Julio was doing in his life, and a complicated immigration process, and love life, and family challenges. But that taught me so much about my organization too, being able to hear those stories. And then when it came time for Julio to tell me that he wanted to leave, it wasn't surprising. And I felt like it actually was very in line with all the work that I had been doing to invest into him as a human being and to help him make good decisions for himself. But I think it is very hard. So much in nonprofit work, we talk about succession planning and we talk about sustainability. And it is sort of goes against, I think, the need to recognize that young people do want to move on, and they need to be free to do so and to be able to chart new careers for themselves. And I think particularly with our undocumented young people, that's been challenging. A lot of the people that came into my organization had never been able to work anywhere else. I talked to you in the beginning about how we were taking people who couldn't work anywhere else. And so we have had people leave, people who were wanting to go into engineering, who were working in social justice because that was what was available to them. Now are going off into engineers, or people who were wanted to go into teaching are now going off to teaching. But I think we've had to learn how to just breathe and ride that out and know that that many people will stay and remain committed to the work because it is so meaningful to them too. So I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
And just echoing everything that Kathy said, being a staff member at E4FC did not feel like I was staff, that I was working. You know, like being able to see my colleagues as family, and our meetings as a bonding experience, right? Starting with that moment of silence and then hearing about how everybody's doing and what we're all going through. I mean, it's a great bonding experience that makes the experience that much more meaningful.
That's the end of my presentation. I just have 8 minutes. If folks have any questions, I'm happy to also bring up any of my co-presenters.